Okay, so just to stay on time, I'm going to go ahead and get started. But good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and welcome to the Hive Think Tank webinar series. So my name's Olivia. I'm the operations manager at the Hive in Silicon Valley, and we're super excited to have you join us and hear from our amazing expert panel speakers from Databricks, Juniper, and Western Digital. So with that being said, I'm going to quickly go over some of today's best practices and explain what the Hive Think Tank does, and then I'll go ahead and pass it over to Ravi, who's the Hive's founder and managing director. So we do love questions, so we love for the audience to use the Q&A button and not the general chat box at the bottom of your screen to ask our presenters questions, which they'll do so towards the end of the panel discussion. And then the event is also being recorded, and I'll share that later on our YouTube channel. So the Hive Think Tank is an ecosystem of thought leaders, corporations, and entrepreneurs. We're an events and content platform with a focus on AI, cybersecurity, future work, fintech, and so much more. We do host events almost every other week on different kind of cutting edge topics in technology and business. So I would love for the audience to join our meetup group and newsletter to stay up to date on our upcoming events, and I'll link that in the chat box below. We do have a couple of events in the next couple of months, so stay tuned to hear more about that from Ravi. And then lastly, I do want to send a huge thank you to our sponsors, Avanta Ventures and Gamuda, for their supports. And if anyone is interested in getting involved with the Hive Think Tank, feel free to reach out directly to me at olivia@hivedata.com. And make sure to follow us on LinkedIn and Twitter. So with that being said, let me go ahead and pass it over to Ravi, our managing director, to talk more about the Hive, introduce our speakers, and share some of our upcoming events.
Thank you, Olivia. And if you can move to the next slide. So just a brief introduction of the Hive. Hive is a early stage venture capital fund focused on data, AI, and applications and use cases of that, especially in the enterprise. And in addition to our presence here in the US, we're based in Palo Alto. We have separate entities in Brazil, Southeast Asia based in Malaysia, India based in Bangalore, and later this year, Europe based in Paris. So if you're an early stage company leveraging data or AI, please do reach out to us. Next slide, please. We have a number of events that are and two different series that are going on in the Hive Think Tank. The Hive Think Tank is our thought leadership forum. And so there's one on generative AI. We've done a few events already. Many of you have attended the event we did with Databricks, and also the event that we did with Karthik Narasimhan, who was the co-author of the original GPT paper. And so we have many more that are being scheduled on the generative AI side. And we're starting a new series on the future of work in the fall. Next slide, please. Very relevant to the discussion today is a recent blog that my colleague and partner Kamesh put out. And you'll see sort of our view, and in particular his view, on how we see sort of generative AI evolving in the enterprise and the disruption of SaaS applications with sort of AI native applications. So Olivia will post a link to this. Next slide, please. So we have a whole series of events. Next week, we have an event on how enterprise service management, IT service management is being impacted by generative AI with NVIDIA, ServiceNow, and Uber. Next, please. And following that, I'll be moderating an event with SAP, Rockset, and Salesforce. So these are vendors who are embedding generative approaches, and it'll be exciting to hear from them as to what sort of that roadmap looks like. Next slide, please. After that, we have two future of work events. Here we have vendors, some of the leading vendors, and moderated by a customer, in this case, Goldman Sachs, on September 13th. And following that, we have an event where the customers of these solutions are participating in a discussion on how the nature of work is changing with remote work, with contingent work, and how solutions are addressing that. And so, if you go to the next slide, I'm very excited to be introducing the panel today. Merv Adrian is very well known in the data management database space. He used to be at Gartner, at Forrester, at Giga. And thank you, Merv, for moderating the event today. We also have Naveen Zutshi, who's the Chief Information Officer of Databricks, Sharon Mandel, who is the CIO of Juniper Networks, and Seish Tirumala, who's the CIO of Western Digital. With that, I'll hand it over to you, Merv. Please feel free to ask questions and use the Q&A button.
Thank you very much, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are, everybody. This one is a little different than some of the other ones you just saw announced for the future, because it is about enterprise adoption. We spend a lot of our time here looking at the future, and as you heard, I just came from Gartner recently. My most recent role was tracking what enterprises were doing with technologies. There's a significant lag there between what we're talking about and what actually happens in enterprises. So I'm very eager to hear from our panelists about what they're actually seeing as deployment. And Olivia, if you don't mind putting up that slide. Yeah, this is just a kind of a perspective that industry analysts have on this. This is one of my colleagues from Gartner talking about a survey that was done fairly recently, which said that only 32% of CIOs had actually put some significant AI into their operations, even though nearly 3 times that many had said 3 years earlier that they would be. And we can take that slide down. That's a little bit like remembering that for CIOs, surveys about what they're going to do is kind of like doing a survey about kids' letters to Santa Claus. It doesn't mean you're actually going to get it or that you'll have time to do it. So it's always important to hear the perspective of people in the field about what they're doing with these technologies. And also it's important to remember that all of the frenzy about generative AI is literally only 2 quarters in. The first mentions of this for most of us came back in October, November of last year. It started to really be talked about in January. Here we are in July, and much of the messaging in the market today is, if you're not already doing this, you're terribly far behind. So let's throw a little dash of cold water on that. I'm going to ask each of our panelists to introduce themselves and talk about what they're doing today in their roles. And I don't know if we should do this alphabetically. Let's start with Sharon, alphabetically by last name. Why don't you tell us what you're up to?
Sure. So I'm Sharon Mandel. I'm the CIO of Juniper Networks. And with respect to AI, Juniper's core enterprise product, that's about a quarter of our business now. It is based on using AI, not the generative AI, in order to make the experience of operating the network and making decisions and auto-correcting the network. So we've been playing with AI for quite some time, not playing, but actually productizing, and it's in production in some very, very large companies. But with the advent of generative AI, there's a couple of things that I participate in. One is, again, prior to generative AI, we had developed a set of AI principles around, kind of our responsible use of AI and our viewpoint on that. And I was part of the group and the team along with our CTO and our COO and our legal teams and various other folks, putting that together, publishing it, talking to shareholders, because they're increasingly interested from almost an ESG point of view, what's going to happen with this. And then as generative AI came out, we've kind of extended that governance and kind of corporate-wide alignment on how we're going to go attack and innovate around this technology, rather than, thousands of random initiatives coming up, because we have to balance both really driving innovation around this technology with the risks as a company that has IP and lives and dies on that IP, making sure that we protect those things and it doesn't leak out, and that we're using things in the appropriate way. So
let me jump over to Seish here. Perhaps the same question. Where are you guys? What's going on today? What's, if anything, in production that people are actually putting their hands on?
Yeah, so again, just as an intro, again, glad to be here. Seish Tirumala, the CIO at Western Digital. I just completed my third month anniversary just recently. So again, within WD, we have a pretty complex global supply chain. So a lot of our AI that we have put in place have been a lot with regards to our supply chain, right? Whether it be our digital twin, how do we really look at a lot of the massive CapEx investments that we put in our, fab, semiconductor manufacturing? Are you getting the test yields? Can you predict potential failures? Even as we have pretty massive equipment, as we take millions of copies of images, can you predict your defects? So again, I think a lot of our work specifically to the AI realm, both in terms of structured data, text, images, has really been in our digital twin supply chain arena, right? Now, when it comes to generative AI, just being humble, it's a learning that we are all intrigued by. It hit us more as a consumer. Now we're all trying to scratch our brains in terms of what does this mean for the enterprise? How do we really think about the right use cases, right? Whether it's driving for a global company, we're about 50,000 plus employees. Again, when you think about it, it's all about findability, productivity, efficiencies, those sorts of things. And then at the same time, right, again, what's the fine line between rational experimentation versus true business cases, right? So I think it's more on the cusp of, let's learn and be intrigued and then figure out how do we, apply the lenses of business value, et cetera.
Great answer. Naveen, you probably have a slightly different perspective because you're actually in the market helping to sell some of this to people, but you also have your role as CIO. How do you answer these questions?
Yeah, so Naveen Zuchi, I've been the CIO at Databricks now for 18 months or so. As a product, we are a data and AI company. We are used by 10,000 plus customers worldwide. We have actually over 1,000 customers now who are using NLP and large language models foundationally within our platform. So it's actually surprising at the speed with which customers have moved onto our platform to use it for AI needs. And then we have a lot more customers for AI needs because we have products like MLflow and others which enable you to do machine learning and AI pretty seamlessly in production. We have also done quite a bit of work on foundational models. So I think a few months ago, we released Dolly, which is an open source model that was built and showed the power that we can build something in $30 or less. And then we also released the weights around it. We also crowdsourced the 15,000 questions, and those were released as well so that you can build your own models using Dolly. And then we recently also acquired a company called Mosaic ML, and their claim to fame is building MPT3, 7 billion and now 30 billion parameter models that are foundational models that they have open sourced as well. And they have a very strong research and data team, AI research team from MIT and others that is pioneering a lot of development around foundational models. And then on the product side, in addition to that, we are building more and more custom tooling products that will enable you to build AI from pre-training to training to inference to productionalizing to vector embeddings to LangChain modeling. So quite a bit of work, a lot of work going on right now in the company around that. And a lot of it is in production already. And then internally, we have knowledgebase.kb.databricks.com. If you go there, you will see a large language model that has been in production now for a few months and just does Q&A, pretty simple use case where you take what was publicly available support data and you're using vector databases to embed it and then create a large language model around it. The vision internally is to build an AI-augmented modern enterprise at Databricks, and we believe that we can achieve step change in productivity using AI.
It's interesting to hear the word humble used. I think it's hard not to be humble when we're talking about models that have how many questions did you say? 30 million?
30 billion per annum.
30 billion per annum. Most of us can't get our minds around that. Which perhaps is a reason we hear another one of those H words a lot, and that word being hallucinations. We're all pretty familiar with how easy it is for this stuff to get off the rails, and I guess that's one of the first questions that we might want to spend a little time exploring in order to contain the enthusiasm of the folks in our organizations who are desperate to get started using these tools, perhaps before we're quite ready for them. It seems to me that one of the questions that we're facing a lot is, what are the skills out there? This is so new. In many cases, our smart employees who are playing with it are ahead of the rest of us. And there's a whole set of new skills from, maybe the most popular job for 2023, prompt engineer is likely to be one of them. How do you guys look at the skill requirement and the skills acquisition process in your organizations as part of this effort? And Sharon, let me go back to you again to start.
Sure. Well, as I mentioned, we've been doing AI for a while, so we have people in our CTO group, we have people in our MIST product groups. I don't know that we've issued anyone the title prompt engineer yet, but typically they're people who are strong around data engineering, data science. In some cases, we're using some of Naveen's products in our marketing team. We have people who are who have a background in actually, and some PhDs who are, who grew up in the AI world. I think that the skill sets will come out, and I don't know that they'll dramatically change. The titles may change, but I think it's really more about how you structure your organization around those skills, because those really intense engineering, AI focused skills are hard to get your hands on. And so it's how do you put the right governance in place so that you're accessing them on the things that and this is always the case for any skill set, right? Mm-hmm. How do you manage and prioritize your efforts and drive the use of those people on the things that you believe are going to yield the most value for your organization, because you're not gonna populate everybody with the skill set. And then it's how do people who want to use generative AI versus build it, right? So and that's a difference as well. How do you have processes in place? So I'll give you an example. We launched an AI-driven career marketplace and career pathing tool in the company, and it's a SaaS product. So as is often the case, IT or our CTO organization had no visibility into it. So it's really, now so we've put some new processes in place around reviews of software. So we're asking the right questions, and we're making sure that the appropriate bias audits have been done by the company we purchased this from, so that we don't run into any ethical issues. Not that that guarantees you won't, but that the right checks and the right diligence is done before you just buy a product that might have this stuff embedded in it. So I think it's a mix of what are the skills you need to actually build, whether it's internal use cases, external products, and then how do you prioritize around those skills, and then how do you make the skill available to the broader company as they're making decisions on what to use to drive their part of their business.
Thank you, Sesh. I suspect that's an issue that you've stubbed your toe on over there more than once, because some of the technology that you're involved in, taking a shot of a board to look for defects, it's a very, very highly specialized skill that probably not very many people could comment on the efficacy of the tool they're using, but they simply have to rely on it to be right or wrong. It's another set of skills questions, as Sharon points out, to evaluate the issues around the tools themselves. Do you guys run into this as a secondary issue in your skills acquisition process?
Yeah, absolutely. Right. So I think specific to the high-level use cases that I cited, just in terms of we have a data science, data engineering, ML ops, and a data team, right? Again, highly sought after. The demand far outweighs the supply that we have. So it goes back to ruthless prioritization and where do we really put our mind share. But again, I'm an old school guy, and I don't know how many people remember the skill set of just data modelers, right? I still think to a large extent within our organization, we're still trying to answer questions as to what happened, right? You sit in QBRs, you look at business reviews. It's always sitting in Q4, you're looking at Q3 data, and everyone's really having explanations as to why we missed a sales forecast, why do we have more excess and obsolete, right? What is the seller productivity, et cetera. So I think one of the key skills, in a way, going back to basics, given that data is the key substrate in all of this, because always algorithms get the sexy buzz, but it goes back to the data, right? It's, and we've all spent, over time trying to create systems of record, putting all the data into a data warehouse and all that, right? And we've all got, to an extent, certain mixed results and feedback. But again, I think the next step is really, what skills do you need that can better connect these data systems? And also keep in mind, being in IT, over the last many years, we all have deployed SaaS applications, right? So therefore, the role of IT has really been delegated to being an administrator. And you need to bring back that process expertise and the data expertise so that you can connect a sales opportunity record to a deal, to an order, to a supply chain. And if you really want better forecasting, how do you really connect some of these things? And by and large, many a time, things come back to customer hierarchies not connected, product hierarchies not connected. So it goes back to the basics of data modeling. So I think at least within my area, I'm going to be doubling down on data modelers, right? And obviously, when it comes to LLMs, it's going to be a learning, to be honest, saying how much do you want to build versus, leverage solutions out there. I don't think, given everyone's macro conditions, that you can go and say, let me go hire 10 additional high-cost country skill set and resources, right? So you need to be very deliberate about your make versus buy, and really, as an industry, where do you differentiate, right? And really apply your sparse resources in the areas that you think will differentiate rather than be commoditized.
Well, you're certainly saying things that appeal to me as a data guy, and I suspect Naveen agrees. As you respond to this, Naveen, would you also give us your thoughts on whether or not we're talking about some disintermediation here for the data analysts? We build these systems. Much of the software that you're responsible for at Databricks is about many of the issues that Sesh just talked about, but we're kind of hands-on with the data itself. And to some degree, once we put these models in place, we're letting them go do a lot of the work for us. And I think there's a little bit of a question about whether we're going to lose touch with it at some level because of that indirection, if you will. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, so I think Sharon touched on some of this, which is what we are seeing is English may be the new programming language. Like Andre Karpathy said that, and it can't be just English, any language of your choice. And what we are seeing is there is a huge democratization, at least of experimentation within our teams. And IT is not the only one that is actually leveraging or building tools based on data and AI. We have a pretty strong field engineering team. We have a really strong technical support team. And we have even sales reps who are using Gen AI capabilities to make themselves a lot more productive. So for example, summarization, email summarizations, action items, there are a lot of interesting use cases where they're changing the behavior and they're changing the way they work. And so I think to your question of data analysts and what will be the future of data analysts compared to, if I'm a business user, can I just do the work myself? I think it's still fairly hard to convert English into SQL. We are building tools to enable you to do that, but you have to have some preciseness of language, and then you have to make sure that the result set is understanding the acronyms and understands the schema of your data model. And so that's quite a bit of work that is going to go in over the next year or two to help us get there. So I'm not as worried about that, data analysts will have to look for other things. There will be opportunities for them, but I do think that there are more and more opportunities for anyone in the company to actually use data to drive more insights themselves. And then on the skills side broadly, we are fortunate. We have quite a bit of researchers who are actually doing foundational models and building foundational models. The problem I have is a little different. The problem I have is like, how do I build IT, which is really strong in software engineering disciplines? And that's what we have been focused over the last 18 months. But I've just accelerated that part because of the work that we need to do. And it's primarily software engineering skills, whether you're a data engineer, data scientist, but ultimately you need to be a really strong software engineer to be able to do some of that work. And we are hiring quite a few people to help with that as well. And what we are seeing, some of the new college grads are doing a really good job of building models or building use cases on the models that we have presented. And the other thing that we have been fortunate with is we have built a abstract platform layer at Databricks where we can just leverage that to start building on top of, which makes the development a lot easier rather than you having to figure out everything on your own. So that's been a huge help for our internal use cases.
So let's go down that road a little bit. We actually have a question in the Q&A panel, and please do use that to send us questions. It's very relevant to what you were just saying. What are you folks doing to democratize this within your organization? How do you get there? I think there's a risk element to this question, which is that models may come in with a very good understanding of the general, but the specific, the internal things, the things that relate to your IP, the things that make your company different from other companies, obviously until we have retrieval assisted generation models in place to pull in additional information to give to those models, we're not going to be preventing the hallucination problem that Gen AI has been subject to. So how do you push this out beyond the highly skilled people that we've been talking about? And anybody just jump in here and tell us what you're up to get that done. Or I can call on you individually if you're reluctant to. I know how shy you all are.
So I think on hallucinations, one of the things that we do is we use this pattern called, vector databases to LangChain to LLMs. And the reason is because I think you can use a third-party vector database, or you can use something that we're starting to provide. But if you think about, we do have a lot of data, or we have documents, we have internal documents. And let's say you have support docs. You don't want to search against the entire web to get your support docs. You have the support docs. You just want to make sure it grounds, the large language model grounds against the docs that you have. And then what you are using the LLM model for is maybe extraction and summarization, which reduces the amount of hallucination more. And so that model may not answer question about what is the baseball score, but it doesn't need to. But it will be able to do a better job of answering the question around your own support issues. So,
or maybe it's learned where to go look for that.
Yeah.
Most of the
So we don't
hallucinations
we are
that
not
I've
building
seen,
general purpose models right now. We are building more specific models for specific tasks. Now, there may come a time where we will have a general purpose bot, which will do a lot of things. But right now we have bots that we have built. We have built actually quite a few Slack bots that do specific tasks for both internal optimization and production. And I think if that pattern is actually fairly documented, well documented, both in industry as well as us internally, and it doesn't require a lot of redoing that work. If you're a good software engineer, you can pick it up quite fast, which is what our experience has been with people. I think the bigger challenge that we all run into is, like, do we have the right data sets? Do we have the right quality of data sets? Do we have the right use cases? And then do we get the reliability of the answers that we are looking for based on the data set? So I think my expectation there is we are doing a lot of experiments. Some of them will fail. Some of them will invariably fail. A few of them will succeed quite spectacularly.
It may feel a little skewed when we're talking to companies like Western Digital, who are engineering companies fundamentally, but democratization, I'm sure, is an issue there too. There are people who are not engineers, especially not software engineers, who we'd like to bring into this. Are you looking at that issue there, Sesh, today?
Yeah, absolutely, right. So again, I think back to my earlier comment, and Naveen also hit on it, right? As a company, we've also done a lot of M&A over the many years, right? So what happens is, again, you go back to, a simple question like, hey, let's get a customer 360 view of all our products that are deployed in a customer, right? And if you try to just answer that question, and then you work your way backwards, you figure out what are all the data sets that you need, what is not connected, etc. So I think the key thing is for non-engineering folks is, hey, let's take a day in the life off, right? And figure out, based on what structured, unstructured data, and how do you start to make those ties, right? Even simple things like, hey, the salesperson delivered a great EBC material on this technology with this customer, like findability problem, right? So even cataloging things and making it accessible, because then if you want, how good is a chat bot if all the right data sources and metadata and tagging are not in place, right? So then how do you serve it up? Then comes, okay, how do you apply data privacy? Who gets to see that as you think about the different models that we want to enable? But I go back to, hey, how can we start to inventory, catalog, even have data dictionary, and start to, have a track even to address the fundamentals, right? And then the software engineering track, and then the overall LLM track, right? So again, you need to come back with, specific outcomes, and how do you create the right teams and build the synergies to go tackle data quality, data completeness problem, LLM model problem. And then many a time, even as you think about chatbots, they're good from, a lot of the action and task oriented, but the moment you want to thread a text-based response to a transactional system, like, connecting to a sales order, a trouble ticket, or more detailed information, there's still work to be done, right? So,
sure.
So it's a little long-winded, but hopefully that sheds some light.
Those questions never go away. And Sharon, before I move to the next question, in case you wanted to make a comment.
Yeah. So a couple things we're doing so one is we're building so I mentioned we have this sort of steering group. And as an engineering company, one of the things we're doing to democratize things is we build a lot of software and we're doing POCs with various co-pilots. And we're doing that. We built some pretty strict, not strict, but we built some guidelines on how engineers should think about this. And we're doing training. So our legal team has like literally held sessions with, you know, all of they've come to our team to talk to us about some of the things. And, you know, I do have, I can describe a slide to you, but I can't share it because it's got the Juniper confidential. I did try to go get it, but it's labeled Juniper confidential, but I can kind of walk you through kind of some of the things we're trying to do education. Separately, we're building a course on, you know, sort of what is Gen AI, and then tailor that course kind of as we understand common use cases that it could be used for, kind of tailor the course depending on who the employee is for in a way that makes sense to them about how this might be used in their area of work and in the company. And then again, having these guidelines and policies at the back of it. So really trying to touch every employee and not just the people building products. But when I talked about, you know, these guidelines for software engineers, you know, we have whether, you know, it has a 2-degree axis with exposure, you know, is it customer facing or, you know, internal use only, and the sensitivity of the information. Are you working in a sandbox? Are you putting things in production? Making sure around that hallucination question, has there been human-based peer review of what you've done so before you can put something into production, you know, an actual cycle to kind of understand how much does this thing, you know, hallucinate, and is it really ready for prime time? So we've started to really put some of that structure in place, but we're trying to go, you know, very wide and broad, because the general feeling is this is going to transform how people work and how people develop products. And the longer we wait to just drive even awareness, you know, as a company that's all about innovation, we feel like that puts us at existential risk. So those are some of the other things we're trying to do more broadly across the organization.
So part of that answer got to a question that's popped up a couple times in the Q&A box here, which is how do we figure out what to spend our time on? Where do we assess business value and use that to determine which things to work on? It may be obvious in some engineering organizations that there are specific engineering problems we can point at, but thinking more broadly, is there a process that you are seeing? And Sesh, let me start with you to assess the potential business value of something that people say, I'd like to try this tool out on.
Yeah, I mean, generally, you know, having worked in many companies, right, I always find that many people have a hard time in articulating and quantifying business value. Everyone can talk about the what and the how. Very rarely I've seen a good business case with the why, right? But having said that, I think some of the, at least the parameters of looking at the different inflow of requests that come in, right? You know, typically if you have a large engineering or a sales organization, right? One is productivity and efficiency, right? By having this, how much of time can you save, right? On a weekly basis, et cetera. Then the second thing is going to be just around improvements in cycle time. Can you make better bridges between, let's say a customer has called in for a support ticket and bridge it better with engineering, given it's a known defect, you know, look up something really quick or point them to a document or FAQ or whatever that is, right? So again, I think a lot of it is around just productivity, efficiency, better cycle time, you know, and then there are things where from a sales perspective, I touched on it briefly in terms of, you know, even using external market data, right? You know, one of the things many companies get blindsided is when suddenly there's a revenue decline, you know, and when you look at your external customer data and you look at, you know, how many PCs have shipped, for instance, what correlation does it have to your industry? And how can you predict a potential, revenue drop? And it was a case in point for our own company, right? When you see your big cloud providers and data center spend go down, what could you do to predict a potential impact to you because you're in the food chain too, right? It's going to hit you at some point. So again, I think the use cases of, a more predictive aspect of the house rather than answer questions that have happened yesterday, last week, last month. Can we potentially say that by implementing this use case, we have a better sales prediction, forecast accuracy, lower inventory, turns, that would result in it, or better CapEx utilization, et cetera. So again, applying those filters and then saying, where would we prioritize? And you need to Sharon's earlier point, create the governance structure, right? It's easy to say yes, but again, how do you bring the right, and here's where, IT leaders also have to play a key role is, how do you bring the leader for sales and manufacturing and operations and finance and get them to make the decision wearing the company hat rather than the functional hat?
So I'm gonna not go down the rat hole of why don't we ask Chat-GPT to do this for us and tell us where the business value would be?
Chat-GPT doesn't give opinions, so
write me a business case for right. And
it's so
be
funny
sure
you
to
said that, right?
include.
Because recently we were brainstorming on what's a good CFO cockpit needs to look like.
Yeah.
And we were all scratching our brains, and finally somebody said, let me ask ChatGPT a CFO cockpit. And believe it or not, we got 7 great nuggets of what a CFO cockpit needs to look like.
There you go. So
but if you have to do the trade-off between the CFO cockpit and the sales cockpit, is ChatGPT going to tell you?
No, it wouldn't.
And so it's those rubrics around prioritization, and it's interesting. I've heard. So I was actually literally on a call with with Gartner this morning where they were describing how they see innovation using LLMs evolving and
doing a lot of work there.
And that it's and I've heard this before that Gartner, but it's much more like science, and it's less about they talked it's much more like form a hypothesis, test the hypothesis, and then work your way through. And along there, they're making suggestions. Humans tend to narrow things to things they believe they're capable of, while I've heard using generative AI is the place to go place your big bets for things that humans were never going to be able to do. They also kind of say you can come up and iterate on many, many more ideas very quickly. And they were using examples in pharma, in furniture design, in different things about, how the generative AI can produce the ideas and help you create some of the tests around them. So then it's actually that helping you kind of do the sorting thing. And you may look to many things that you wouldn't have before in a classic decision-making process. So I don't think we have it figured out yet at Juniper, how we're perfectly going to do this.
I want to come back to this in a minute.
But I think it's really interesting how I think this is going to drive a major mindset shift in how you place bets, where you tended to say, oh, let's go grab the low-hanging fruit. Well, but we know how to do the low-hanging fruit. But what can the machines do that we couldn't do, right? And how does that make us better in dramatically different ways?
Just for curiosity's sake, since we have quite a number of people listening to this event, I thought we'd ask them where they are in their journey. So we have a quick poll question for you. Very simple yes or no answer. Do you have a generative AI-based application in production today? Please vote on that. We can't. We're just hosts and presenters, so we don't get to vote on that. But we'd be very happy to hear what you think. So let me pick up the thread where we were. Naveen, you have to think about what to bring to market to offer your prospects and customers. You're actually building models and models for models to sell to them. How does that process look like for you guys? How are you identifying things where business value might be realized and therefore might be marketable?
Yeah, I think a couple of things we are doing. We have a business and IT hackathon next week, where we are actually inviting business leaders and business, not leaders, but business users to work with engineers directly over the next week or so to do a hackathon. And we already have a list of quite a few ideas. In engineering, we did a hackathon, and they were like probably over 100 ideas that were built. Field engineering, the same thing. So we have a lot of crowdsourcing based idea, and then we build this internal strategy around how should large language models and how should AI play a part in our own strategy. We build policy docs. How do we use it without compromising on IP and controls and things like that? And we have built an abstract layer, which is like a gateway. And then I think there's a gateway that is also being produced for the customers, where you can do metering, you can pick and choose which LLM model that you want to use. Because I think cost can be a big issue for some customers. And then you can also use a mixture of open source models or a third-party model. So that's how we are addressing it. I think Sharon, or post-session Sharon brought up, like, we are all learning, right? Like, we may be a little bit ahead, but that doesn't mean much here right now. Everyone is working really hard, trying to figure out how we can leverage it, how we can drive the best benefit and value for a company without causing any impact, right? So that's the other issue. And then without causing toxicity and bias in the models themselves. So we really check for reliability there. And then how do we continue to innovate on a product standpoint so that companies like other companies can benefit from using this in their toolkit. And the way I think about it is you have a pretty broad AI toolkit. You have NLP-based models like large language models. You have other models as well. So for example, we already use data science-based models to do our data science forecast, sales forecast. In fact, our reps rely on the data science forecast a lot more than their own forecast. We have been using it for years, and it's highly accurate. And so that is an example where it's not only been productionized, it's actually being leveraged by our reps, which traditionally would not be the case. And we are a consumption-based business, so makes it a little different. So I think that's an example that you will just use all of these tools in your toolkit. And then the one thing that I haven't seen as much yet happen, which will happen over the next probably 6 to 12 months, is our behavior will change. What we do in a daily life, how we use these products seamlessly in our daily work will start changing, right? You will start using it more and more to where it becomes just another tool. Like you had internet. Before that, you had to capture a lot of knowledge internally. You had to use a lot of libraries to go get information, or you would ask someone else. Now you just go to Google and find information. And in a similar manner, you're going to use a lot of this as, whether they take the form of bots or whatever that they may take the form of, they will be an assistant to you. Like, so think about persona-based assistants. And so you will have your own assistant, which will actually help you augment your capabilities.
More than one, I would imagine. I mean,
yeah, it's possible.
It seems to me that as we think about what corpus do we point these models towards, and they're going to be different ones. There's the finance organization's view. There's the engineering organization's view. So I might ask a different advisor. And I might ask multiple different advisors on the same question, which is a really intriguing possibility. So I'm conscious we're only down to a few minutes. So I want to pick up on the fact that we got data kind of similar to what that opening Gartner slide suggested when we asked this audience how many of them were actually active. It was like 25% or so. So don't worry, folks. You're not as far behind as you might think you are, and there's plenty of time to think about what to do next. We had a question about how do organizations, especially IT leaders, prepare for end user usage? I'm going to generalize it. They were asking specifically about compute device option. I'd like to make it broader than that. What should IT leaders be thinking about today as this wave hits their organization about how they prepare themselves and their constituency, who, by the way, may very well operate entirely without talking to IT because all this stuff is available? How do we get ourselves ready for this next wave? Any advice?
Get in the pool.
Put your water wings on first, but get in the pool, right?
Exactly. Maybe don't dive off the deep end, but so look, as we do this steering committee, and I said we're trying to involve people broadly. We're participating in the coding co-pilot. It's structured and it's run out of our CTO office, but I have people who are on my team who write code, who are trying out the different tools and giving the feedback back. So we're starting to have people put hands on. And one of the things about the question is you asked about something in production. And I think a lot of people are experimenting, right? So we talked about the fact that, we have our own internal policy and legal guidelines we have to get in effect. But, when OpenAI came, the OpenAI is still selling, Chat-GPT probably on a Shopify IT infrastructure of their own, right? They didn't have a commercial agreement. They announced a product and they weren't ready to do business. I says, I don't know if they have a CIO yet. Right.
Welcome to the 21st century.
Right. Yeah. So Microsoft, announces products and the coding copilot is available to everybody, but you're on special lists for the M365 copilots, if you weren't in very early or a very large customer. And then there's questions, about private instances. And then, can you do they have the GPUs to support all of us, right? Because there's the building of the model, but there's also the querying, and both of those require compute power that all of these cloud providers may not be able to expand to the every enterprise. So we're going through this period of
shakeout,
storming, forming, norming, and I don't think we've hit norming yet, right? I think we're in the storming and forming stage. Yeah. But I think that the best thing to do is to try some things out. My interns that I hired this year, they're working on these fine tuning of an LLM that, we take the one that's the Juniper corpus of information that we would share externally through support or through the bots in our products. And then how do we layer in the internal things that you might not expose, but that you might want to be able to answer through your help desk or your corporates, right? So we're experimenting, and I think but we're not necessarily just ramming things and putting them in the hands of 10,000 people all at once, right? We're playing, and I think many more people are in that state than maybe I have a production.
Well, you've talked about governance already more than once in this discussion, and it's highly relevant here. And Naveen, I'm sure this is something you guys think about because you're selling people the technology that they might be using to identify PII or IP that they don't want shared. And if we're going to point the models to that corpus that your technology is helping to build, they need to be aware of what guardrails they can construct to ensure that the scope of experimentation inside that pool that we just jumped into is constrained somehow to make sure that we don't swallow too much of the wrong kind of water. Boy, that was a tortured metaphor. I'm sorry. But do you see this as something that's addressable at the data layer with appropriate data governance so that the tools don't wander off the reservation when they're doing what they do?
Well, I think just first and foremost, generative AI, the premise itself is it's generating text. So
that's the scary part. Yeah.
So that is let's just get that out in the open. I think when it comes to good data governance and access governance, policy governance, IP governance, PII governance. You have to have policies which are planned for your company, and then you have to have tools that will help you establish that. And every company is going to be different. Every company will have their own needs. Some regulated companies will have a lot more higher standards to meet up to, and then other companies may have different needs. You also have to figure out what kind of data sets you're working with. And I think we provide some tooling. Other companies provide that tooling as well, where you can identify PII data. You can create the metadata layer, and then you can determine based on the metadata layer which data sets, which corpuses you want to provide and make more generally available to your employees versus others. But it's not an easy problem to solve. And there are many vendors that do just this, be in the job of data governance. And so I don't have a silver bullet answer to your question.
Sesh, any comment here? And then I'll close it out.
Yeah, no, I'll just say that, to Sharon's point, we all have to lean in and jump in. It's a team sport, right? Because you got to bring in your CISO early on to look at, endpoint security. You have risk and compliance aspects. You also want to get your legal friends along, right? So I think there's a role in terms of at the data level, security, legality and compliance perspective. And then also from apps and not to forget infrastructure, right? Because still many companies run a lot of workloads on-prem, right? And when you start to think about LLMs, and back to the question that was asked, one is what's your end compute device as a user, but then also in view of Moore's law and GPU and large language models, evolution and growth, what does that mean in terms of if you're running data centers, right? What does that mean? And if you're with the cloud, how do you look at cost and adoption, et cetera, right? So there's multiple facets to it. So you got to break it down by users, applications, infrastructure, data, and then comes obviously the security and the legality, all encompassing, and everyone's got a key role in this, right? So we all have to figure it out.
Well, I never thought I would end a session online by quoting a Russian proverb. But there's one that President Reagan used to like to use: Doverai no proverai, trust but verify. We are experimenting, and those results, to Naveen's point, are coming from a model that is designed to predict the next thing, not necessarily source it. So yeah, we better be watching these outcomes in order to be sure that we're comfortable with them before we're acting too aggressively on them. Thank you all very much for all your insights today. This was a fascinating conversation from the edge. You guys are out there ahead of obviously 75% of today's audience in deploying stuff, and I suspect even more of the market at large. It's going to be a very, very interesting next couple of years. Thanks again for joining us today. Back to you,
Thank you everyone so much.
Yeah. Thank you, Merv, Naveen, Sharon, and Sesh. Really appreciate your participation today. What a great event. Thank you.
Thanks for having us, Ravi. See you soon.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Have a good day, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.